The 2024 U.S. Chess Championship and U.S. Women's Chess Championship kicked off today with the first round of classical action. Once again, we have a round-robin format featuring 12 of the country's best players in both sections fighting it out for over $400,000 in prize money. With that, let's get into the first round results. And in the open section, we actually had all 6 games finish in a draw, as a couple players missed opportunities to get a large advantage, including Grandmaster Hans Niemann, who ended up drawing against the top seed and defending champion Fabiano Caruana. Meanwhile, in the U.S. Women's Chess Championship, multiple players started off with a win, including reigning champion and top seed Carissa, who defeated Thalia Cervantes, Begim Tokhirjonova, who defeated the 2-time champion Paikidze, and the wildcard pick Rose Atwell, who managed to upset 4-time U.S. Women's Champ Anna Zatonski. So going into the games, we'll start with the open, with the key game of the round being Hans Niemann playing white against Fabiano Caruana. There were a couple other big games as well, like Leinier Dominguez white against Wesley. So this game ended up being very, very sharp. Right from the opening, we got this typical Italian game where on this move, move 7, Caruana goes for this advance with Queen f6, which usually comes with aggressive intentions of playing g5 on the king side. So this game definitely saw a very, very big fight. Hans starts playing on the queen side, b5, knight d8, now bishop to e3, knight e6. Caruana allows white to take on b6 if he wants to, ruining black structure on the queen side, but then giving up the f4 square on the king side. So really, really complicated game here. We saw knight f4, d4, and Caruana spending lots of time here. He actually got into time trouble in this game, which was definitely a big factor as he goes for some really active play, bishop g4, bishop h5, bishop to f1. And here he ends up castling. Maybe this was the moment black should have played g5. According to the engine, looking to play for g4. White might have to play g4 themselves, bishop to g6, and things could get very, very messy here, but apparently it's approximately balanced. Instead, after castles, Hans might have missed some opportunities. For example, g3 here for white, I think would have been pretty good, just kicking the knight back. Instead, he goes rook to c1, which is also a nice move, knight to e6 from Fabi, and now g4, bishop to g6. And at this point, Hans started spending lots of time, and he actually had a very, very promising move here with the move h4, which could have been very annoying for black to deal with, just threatening to play g5 and trapping black's queen on the king side. So black would have to figure it out, maybe move the knight, something like knight to f4, but then white can continue either with g5 or with king h2, then followed by g5. And it feels actually very, very unpleasant for black. The engine gives white a big advantage, and definitely this seems like a missed opportunity for Hans, who also had a big advantage on the clock. Instead, Hans goes for knight takes e5. Actually a very shocking tactic. I was quite surprised when I saw this one. His point after takes, queen takes, is knight f3, and now black's queen actually is short on squares. If queen d6, white can exchange on d6 and then win the bishop on b6. And if queen f6, then e5, and actually once again the queen is trapped on the king side. So here Caruana, despite the time pressure, he does find basically only moves to survive here. Queen takes e4, white wins the piece back with bishop takes b6, and now the queen is under attack on e4. It's hard to find a good move. If queen d5, there's bishop takes c7 tactics in the position. Knight on e7 is hanging. Queen f4 is also very, very loose. And the queen can get in trouble here and get hit very easily with moves like bishop to e3. So Caruana finds very nice defense, rook a8 counterattack, where it turns out black is okay. Hans goes knight to d4. The point here is that if white takes the queen on e4, then black is taking on d1. We'll recapture with bishop takes e4. Bishop on b6 is still hanging, and so the tactics end up working out here for black. Knight d4 from Hans, nice move, keeping the attack going on the queen on e4. Queen f4, bishop takes a5. And here the players find a nice series of forced moves, where after the exchange on d4, rook takes d4, queen e2. Turns out we get just lots of trades in the position, and eventually things come down to this relatively equal endgame. White is still a bit better here because he can go after the b6 pawn, but it seems like black is in time with the counterplay with h5. So trades on f4, and Hans did try to push this one a bit and look to maximize his winning chances, but Caruana was able to defend despite the time pressure. and eventually he does hold this one as he brings all the pieces back. Some pieces get traded off here. Eventually the players do get a rook endgame here as well, and yeah, eventually Black's weakness on the b file was just not really enough. Here king f2, if white were to take this one, then king h5, and black is getting enough counterplay on the king side. So Caruana does end up saving this one. Definitely a big half-point save, as Hans certainly had his chances in this game. Moving on to the U.S. Women's Championship, couple of big decisive games here, starting with Carissa Yip, defending champion, defeating WGM Thalia Cervantes. This one came out of a Queen's Gamma decline Tarash, and we had a pretty typical structure where black has this isolated d pawn. It's a little bit worse for black, but objectively it is definitely a very playable position. But here what happens is white ends up making very natural moves, just developing all of her pieces. Black does as well, bishop to g4, and now rook d8. But then after queen to c5, all of a sudden black ends up getting under a lot of pressure here. As the queens come off in this endgame, black's pawn on d4 is definitely a target. And here white has the idea of playing h3, kicking the bishop back, and then going knight e1, knight to d3 with a very nice regrouping and blockading the d-pawn. So black goes rook to e7, and then white carries out her plan with h3, bishop e6, knight to e1. And already it's very, very unpleasant here. Apparently, according to the engine, black had to find the move d3 here. That's not so hard to find, but then after e3, white is still threatening ideas of like knight e1 and h3 and so on. Here black would have to find the move rook to c8 in order to hold the balance. A very, very tough move, basically just leaving the d-pawn unprotected, with the idea of playing knight to b4 and getting counterplay on the c-file and eventually against white's back rank. So that's very, very tough to see. That's computer stuff, which just indicates that the position was already probably pretty difficult for black to hold. In any case, we have rook e7, h3, bishop e6, knight to e1. Now black definitely needed to move this knight, something like knight to b4 or knight b8, to avoid bishop takes c6. But Thalia ends up allowing you the rook d7, and now after takes, and h4, just saving the h-pawn, this endgame ends up being very, very nice for white, as she has basically better minor piece, a good knight against not so great bishop, but really white's structure here is just fantastic. Fewer pawn islands, fewer weaknesses, and then Carissa ends up showing really nice endgame technique here to end up converting this one as one pawn goes down. Eventually white piles up on the queen side, and then she just gets this massive pawns going on the king side. Knight starts hopping around, and yeah, it was basically just cleanup from here. Knight h6, rook h7, and black resigned as she's 3 pawns down, h-pawn is not going anywhere, and the endgame is, of course, completely lost. So good start for Carissa as she tries to win her second title in a row. Also winning was Begim Tokhirjonova, who is often doing really, really well in this tournament. She ended up winning this game as black against the 2-time champion Nazi Paikidze, and this game was quite sharp. The complications start around here after black's move knight to e4. This one came out of a Slav defense, and white was doing fine as of this moment. I think the move knight to e5 here was suggested by the engines, where white is doing pretty well, maybe some f3 ideas, basically just using a bit of advantage in the center and on the c-file as well. Instead, Nazi goes for bishop takes e4 and knight to e5, and she gives up the light squared bishop, which ends up being definitely a critical aspect in this game later on, as black's light squared bishop does end up on the diagonal, and we get a very, very complicated structure here with white playing knight to d2, queen to b8 here, now takes, and eventually white's queen side just ends up under huge pressure. This bishop on d5 ends up being a really strong piece, now a4, and things start to get very, very difficult for white. So this one's pretty sharp, but white's position here definitely starts to fall under a lot of pressure. A takes b3, plays a3. Both players approaching time trouble at this moment as well, and now the game just gets totally out of control with g4, white looking for kingside attacking chances, but black's counterplay seems to come just in time. This move bishop to c6, idea of rook to d5, in case of g takes h5, rook d5, and then rook takes h5, and eventually black is looking for e3 ideas, open up the diagonal, and try to use the light squared bishop. So rook to d5 comes, rook takes b3, queen d8, and here Begim starts regrouping her pieces. And at this point, I think white had to take on e4, but once again, both players in time pressure, very, very difficult to find the right moves. Instead, queen f4 was played, which allows black to take on g4, and I think Begim spotted that after hg, she's got knight takes g4, taking advantage of the fact that queen takes g4 runs into rook to g5, where black wins the queen. So here, white's king side starts to open up. White takes on e4, but now rook f5, knight f6, queen takes f6. I think rook takes f6 was even stronger, with the idea of bringing the queen to d5 soon. And this would have been very, very devastating for white's king. As it happens in the game, we have queen takes f6 and bishop to d5. And I think there were possible chances for white to hold this position, but it's very, very tough with the light squared bishop just pointed at white's king side. And yeah, basically very, very hard to hold this. Begim ends up winning the g pawn, takes the d pawn as well, and now all the endgames are basically winning for black as the mating threats continue there. White has to give up a third pawn. Black took this one, eventually brings the bishop back, and now, yeah, with 3 pawns on the king side, white really wasn't able to hold with the opposite colored bishops. So very, very nice win for Begim as well, as she starts off with 1 out of 1. Rose Atwell also won her game, the wildcard pick, so she's on a perfect score as well. Going into tomorrow's round 2, we have more big matchups coming up, including Caruana against Aronian in the open section, and then Rose Atwell playing white against Carissa in the women. So should be another very, very exciting day, and hopefully I'll see you back here for the recap as well. Until then, take care.